So my name is Justin. For those that don't know me, I am the operations director here at Serviceside. Normally, technology is more on our side, but today it wasn't. So appreciate everyone for your patience. It
Yeah.
did give a few of the members time to get in. So as people enter, I'll try to remember to mute their mics and we'll let Tyler take this over. So if you guys have any questions, just like I said, drop them in the chat there, and I'm sure Tyler would be cool with you guys just asking it in person. But
Yeah.
Tyler, I will make you the host here, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. So let me wrap this charger up here real quick. Well, as Justin said, my name is Tyler. And for some of you guys that might be new listening on this, I own and run a wildlife and forestry consulting business out of central Pennsylvania. So I've worked for a lot of other conservation organizations and whatnot. We talked about that in the first Zoom meeting and whatnot. So I have a lot of skills and a lot of different ideas and whatnot that I can give to you guys that want to try to do some of this stuff on your own properties, or even just learning about what the state does, and too that you can capitalize on some of their improvements too as well that you guys that hunt state ground. So, anyways, we're kind of going to piggyback off of the very first Zoom meeting that we had with timber stand improvement. This time we're the title of this is restoration of native habitat, what you can do there and whatnot. So I have a couple different bulleted points down on a piece of paper that I like to jot what I'm going to talk about down. The first thing is planting native grasses and forbs. As you all know, like 100, 200, 300 years ago, our landscape was perfectly managed at that point by nature. There wasn't, as soon as man came in, we kind of screwed some things up. So now we're trying to correct what what we've done, based upon mankind and whatnot. So we left a lot of our habitat go back to a lot of closed canopy forest. We reverted a lot of the native prairies and stuff into cattle production, and now roads and highways and buildings, and now invasives have encroached in. So a lot of that native grass and forb component has really disappeared off the landscape. So I think with if you guys can get a hold of some of your conservation districts and whatnot will have a no-till drill that's designed to plant native grasses and forbs. So let's just say you want to regenerate a field that's just been timothy, orchard grass, fescue. You want to clean that up and you want to plant native grasses and forbs. That's a good way to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about those invasive cool season grasses that I just listed there. Obviously, that's the first thing in mind to think about is, should I be planting native grasses and forbs? And my answer to that is yes, absolutely, you should be, because it's good, high quality habitat for, big game. But let's not forget about the little guys, and let's think about our small game too. So in establishing the native grasses and forbs, you're going to need to use herbicide. A lot of times, like I said, if you have an old pasture field that you don't even have any horses or cattle or sheep or whatever in on your property, it's a couple acres and whatnot. Just a good general rule of thumb is, sometimes just running right through that with a sprayer full of glyphosate. It's normally about 2 quarts per acre of glyphosate mixed into a sprayer. I have an ATV sprayer. It's 25 gallons. So, I usually do about a 3% solution. So that's going to knock back a lot of your grasses, and you want to time this application in the early spring before any of your forb species come up, like your milkweed, your goldenrod, dogbane, your different asters, there could be black-eyed Susans. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But what I'm saying is when that the grasses that are forming like a big old mat, like a golf course, just this perfect, beautiful, laid out green carpet. Well, that's one of the worst things you can have for wildlife. So just by spraying that application of glyphosate early in the spring or even like early fall will kill those grass species off to let that light in to start rejuvenating the native species of seeds that have laid dormant under that mat for years. So that's one way of doing it. There's a couple other herbicides I'm going to list that you can use too as well. Let's say you missed out on that application early on. So now all of a sudden you got some broadleaf species that are in those invasive grasses. So what you can use other than glyphosate is you can use plateau herbicide, which I'm kind of actually tinkering around with myself at the moment. We used it with the state when I worked for the Pennsylvania Game Commission as a game lands maintenance worker at the time. Plateau herbicide is going to favor your native species, and you got to read the list that's on the bottle. I mean, you can do all your research on that particular herbicide. But I tinkered around with it out at my grandmother's farm because I'm trying to rejuvenate some quail habitat right now, and killed off a lot of the different fescues, the orchard grass, timothy, and smooth brome grass is another one too. That's an invasive sod forming grass. So we want to get rid of that stuff. And what happened is the native seeds that were in the seed bank underneath it, I had milkweed starting to pop up. I had dogbane that started popping up. So I know those seeds are in the seed bed. We just got to get rid of that mat. So that's another herbicide that you can use. And well, most food plotters do know about glyphosate, obviously. Plateau, you obviously want because that's for native habitat restoration. But then you have clethodim too, which is the grass selective herbicide. I usually use that at 2 ounces per gallon of water. So in a backpack spray, you're looking at 8 ounces per gallon of water with a surfactant. You should always have a surfactant mixed in. That allows that chemical to bind onto those plants better. So just taking care of those sod forming grasses with a certain herbicide, and you can spray clethodim throughout the whole entire season. So that'll kill the grass too, and it won't hurt the broadleaf species. We really want to encourage the broadleaf species. I mean, there also could be some, your native grasses in the mix too, like little blue stem, big blue stem, side oat, scrammy, Indian grass, switchgrass, and those will pop up too as well. So let's say you did an application of glyphosate across the whole entire field. You killed off all the grass early. What are the different tools that we can use from there to encourage native species to come back even more? Obviously, the number one thing I'm going to pick out for all of you guys, and you got to be comfortable, you got to be trained in it. I don't know what your guys' states allow and whatnot, but prescribed fire is definitely one of them. I was on, I believe 10 or 15 different prescribed fires when I used to work for the state. We burnt a lot of grass fields, a lot of native grass fields, and that's going to really encourage your native species to come back after doing a burn. Another thing too that you can do, and I've done it too as well, if you guys have tractors, if you know anybody has a tractor, wouldn't really recommending rototilling too much and getting the ground real fine, but there's different times of the year you can an early application when things are starting to green up right away, you can run a disc through or a harrow and just lightly get that 1 to 3 inches of soil disturbed. And I'm not saying making it real nice like a food plot that you're disking down everything that's there. You still want residual plants sticking up. So just by a disturbance in early spring or late fall is what's gonna determine what comes back, the following year or even that later spring and summertime. So if you go do it in the fall, which I like do and rip up that sod, you're going to have a lot of broadleaves come back too as well. Then you're using herbicide. So that's definitely another tool that you can use for promoting a native landscape as well, by using a disc or a harrow. I mean, in early spring, you're going to get a different composition of species. So what I would recommend is doing some part of your property in early spring and do some of your property in like October time frame, just to see what diversity comes back. And maybe after a couple years, you let it go and you're like, okay, now you flip flop. Now you do the one that you did in the spring, you do in the fall, and the one you did in the fall, you do in the spring. So there's different ways of doing it to promote native vegetation within your fields. So, okay, so what comes doing stuff like that, you're going to have you could potentially have woody regeneration in your fields. And we don't want any trees coming up in your fields. We want to revert it back to a native landscape with native grasses and forbs. You know, I'm not saying that you can't have a cedar tree here and there spaced out between it, but for the most part, you do want to keep your woodies out of your fields. You know, prescribed fire will keep them set back. Going through with a backpack sprayer or a UTV sprayer with a wand on it, hitting it with a mixture of 2,4-D and glyphosate. Just spot spraying trees that are coming up to keep them at bay, because you don't want a bunch of trees coming up in your field there and casting shade and stuff like that, and then you just lost out on potentially acres across your whole field of what was primo wildlife habitat. So then too, everybody knows you're going to be fighting invasive species in this landscape too. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You could be fighting tree of heaven. You could be fighting autumn olive, honeysuckle, barberry, bittersweet. You know, for guys down south, I know it's a native species, but your different gums, you're like sweet gum and whatnot. I know it's a native species, but you want to keep it under control. And then you can also go through the winter and, you know, cut them off and do a stump cut treatment too of different herbicides. And I'm going to list off a couple herbicides that you guys, well, particularly one that you can do for sure. And I think I even talked about it in my timber stand improvement section that I did last time. But Tordon RTU, you can get it in little quart bottles. It literally says Tordon RTU right on the bottle, and the acronym for RTU is ready to use. It's got a blue dye in it already. So after the deer season blues, if you had a bad season or even if you had a good season, you can go in there and start doing some habitat improvements in your fields by cutting those trees down real low to the ground and putting that chemical right on the stump. You can obviously use glyphosate's one that you can use. It has an okay kill rate. Sometimes it doesn't kill certain trees, so you got to do your research on what you're using that chemical on, what trees that you're treating, because sometimes that glyphosate can resist. That tree can resist glyphosate. Excuse me. Another one you can use is a chemical called Crossbow. I've used that before. It's 2,4-D and Garlon mixed. That's another one, pretty nasty herbicide you can use. I personally use a herbicide called Pathway, and then I mix a glyphosate product in with that, and it normally puts a hammer down on pretty many species. So, so different herbicide applications. We talked about disking. We talked about burning. Obviously planting native grasses and forbs, and we'll come back to that too. I'll recap on that a little bit more since I didn't do too much. We obviously talked about now controlling invasives and other trees in your native grass and forb areas too. So really the biggest thing I really wanted to talk about here to kind of sum all this practice up is, guys, we're really seeing a decline in a lot of our species, our game species and non-game species, because we don't have this habitat anymore. You know I talk to a lot of guys that don't even see rabbits anymore. I mean, that's just crazy to me. Um, you know, I practice a lot of different habitat improvements, and I see rabbits a lot. And I'm sure there's guys out here listening right now that are small game hunters, and especially quail populations. Uh, you know, here in Pennsylvania, there hasn't been a quail here for, I don't know, well over 100 years, maybe 150 years. So it just just boggles my mind of all the different practices, the different farming practices, and just the way that we've, you know, looked at nature in itself, and we're not taking care of it. Well, now we're all this in this midlife crisis state of habitat improvement that I got to do something now, or my populations are going to decline even more than what they are. So we're kind of at the stable to below, starting to fall off the stable population dynamics of wildlife because of the habitat. So, and then the biggest animal I want to talk about on that is obviously the eastern wild turkey. You know, a lot of farmers are farming every square inch of their property, which rightfully so. I support farmers. I'm not against it. But you know, using different herbicides and stuff that are meant for, you know, growing a crop and are very, very intrusive to wildlife habitat. So that's where we're losing that. Obviously, we're doing a lot of hay fields now with a lot of orchard grass and timothy, a lot of sod-based form grasses and pastures. A lot of stuff was cleared to make pasture, and we planted these invasive grasses, and now they're encroaching on the landscape. So you got to think, and I'm going to hit on this a little bit about the turkey. So a hen turkey will lay on her eggs for 28 days. Okay, so now she's on the ground. Picture her out there in a hayfield somewhere. Okay, you got sod forming grasses. You have farmers that are mowing down hay, so maybe they left a little section go because she's there. Okay, now we left this nice little island for coyotes, fox, bobcat, you know, even crows to pick on her too and take her eggs. Okay, let's see that she does make it. Those eggs do hatch. Now everything starts growing back up. You got to think on a little turkey chick's legs. You know, they're like little toothpicks. So you want to envision that little turkey poult trying to get through that sod forming grass. That's a pretty rough life, isn't it? A real rough life on them. So why we're reverting back and killing those species and planting native grasses and forbs is because our native grasses are clump forming grasses. So there's always little hallways and rooms of bare ground to go around for a little turkey chick or a quail chick or baby rabbits, a fawn, to maneuver in that landscape to get away from a predator and to still be hidden. So then you got all those different flowers and broadleaf species that are growing up in between that too, which is called an umbrella species. And that is really what you want if you guys really want to promote small game, especially bobwhite quail, because they produce seed, attract a lot of insects, and they form literally that umbrella over the top with those big leaves on all of our broadleaf species out there, including ragweed. Especially the first one I can think of is milkweed. Milkweed puts on a real big leaf and is very attractive to insects. So they can get away from storms, they can get away from avian predators that are flying around looking for them. So you guys just got to think now between our native species and our invasive species. It's always going to come back to invasive species. So, and then I'm gonna hit on one last thing here real quick, just because of us starting late and whatnot. I don't know if you guys suffer from this syndrome. Now, this is just all in fun. It's called RMS. It's called recreational mowing syndrome. I am anti-mowing when it comes to promoting native landscapes. Yes, it's a tool, and we mow our food plots. I understand that. You want to mow some invasives down and treat them afterwards. That's fine. But it's a pretty funny clip. It's actually on YouTube. I think it's on Missouri's Department of Conservation. There's a guy on his porch and he's looking out over a field, and it's beautiful. It's got all the natives in it, all the different flowers and whatnot. The pollinators are all over it. There's birds singing. There's deer in it, turkey poults, baby rabbits. And then he goes out and mows all of it down just because it doesn't look good to him. So I'm going to leave that for you guys to think about. And I probably could have hit on a couple other bulleted points underneath this, but I'm sure you guys have questions. So I'm going to wrap it up there due to time and me screwing up the way I did.